to the Clemson Dubcast. It is Miami week as Clemson prepares for the final two games of the regular season. At TigerIllustrated.com, up late this week, examining the screen game, a topic that is a source of consternation, I think, among quite a few Clemson fans. My take on it is it's way more complicated than maybe most folks think, in that there are so many things that are tied to the screen game. So quite often a successful running play is in part the product of the defense's focus on that screen action, if that makes any sense. Maybe it doesn't to some people, but it does to me. Anyway, digging deeply into that at TigerIllustrated.com. My good friends Blake Smith and Brooke Archenhold have been part of the podcast since the beginning, way back in August of 2018. They have an accomplished team of personal injury attorneys at Parham, Smith, and Archenhold, based in Greenville. They are Clemson people, and their skillful attorneys have decades of experience in complicated litigation matters, taking a special interest in medical malpractice, nursing home abuse, and neglect, car accident cases that have left the individuals involved in serious trouble. For a free consultation at Parham, Smith, and Archenhold, call 864-990-4581 or online at parhamlaw.com. That's PARHAM law.com. Celero Communications, formerly known as Tandem Payment, is a full-service integrated electronic payments provider powered by leading-edge technology. Celero provides a wide array of merchant solutions, simplified payments. They make onboarding, taking payments, maintaining risk management and compliance, and getting support quick and easy. At Celero, they're all about helping you achieve sustainable growth as a business. Taking payments isn't the only thing your business needs. With Celero's solutions, you can manage inventory, sell products and services via social media, schedule staff, track sales, get reports, and much, much more. Find out more about Celero at celerocommerce.com. That's CELERO commerce.com.
Football season is grilling season, and Jack Oliver's Pool Spa and Patio is South Carolina's premier source for the big three: Weber, Traeger, and Big Green Egg Grills. Blackstone Griddles, too. I'm Jack Oliver. Grill all your tailgate favorites to perfection with a premium gas, charcoal, or pellet grill, then top it all off with something sizzling from your Blackstone griddle. For grills, griddles, patio furniture, hot tubs, and saunas, shop in store or online at Jack Oliver's Pool Spa and Patio, Forest Drive in Columbia, and jackoliverpools.com.
I'm Josh Burrell, receiver and running back for the Florida State Seminoles. When I'm back home in the Midlands, I enjoy grilling and relaxing with my family, and we get everything we need from Jack Oliver's Pool Spa and Patio.
Thanks, Josh. I'm Jack Oliver, and we proudly offer the Big Green Egg, Weber, and Traeger grills, Blackstone griddles, and beautiful patio furniture, too. We're located at 3303 Forest Drive in Columbia and online at jackoliverpools.com. And we deliver.
They're good people. Go see them today.
Want to share a quick word about Founders Federal Credit Union? If you've been to a sporting event in Clemson, you've probably heard about Founders already. They are the official credit union partner of the Clemson Tigers. In addition to that, all Clemson faculty, staff, and students are eligible for membership, as well as IPTAY members. Matt Gross is a proud Clemson alum and the vice president for the Clemson market for Founders Federal Credit Union. Matt's office is located beside the Walmart Neighborhood Market on Old Greenville Highway in Clemson. For more information, go to foundersfcu.com. Okay, checking in with the situations in Tampa at South Florida in the wake of Jeff Scott's firing, and also in Norman in the midst of a 5-5 season so far in year one under Brent Venables. We will start in the Sunshine State. Here we go. Okay, joined by Matt Baker of the Tampa Bay Times, college football reporter. How you doing, Matt? Thank you for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, first of all, I guess the first reason that I wanted to get in touch with you was just seeing what it's like, boots on the ground at South Florida and Tampa. What has been the, I don't know if fallout is the right word, but just the reactions to Jeff Scott's tenure and then him getting let go, I guess, 11 days ago?
Well, I mean, it needed to happen. I think that was pretty clear. USF did not want to get rid of him. Let me make that just say it as plainly as I can. This wasn't something that they wanted to do. Look, Jeff was and is extremely well liked in the building. I don't think I've met a person who will say a bad thing about him as a human being. And I think a lot of us who are in the industry know that coaches are not exactly saints, right? This is not a profession of those type of people. So for everyone to speak so highly of Jeff and his character says something. The other thing, just leading up to his dismissal and the weeks leading up to it, really the East Carolina game on October 1st is when it really became clear that this might not end well. They were not doing particularly well before then. But, you can excuse all right, you lose a close win at Florida. Well, Florida's a lot more talented. You can get that by. Getting thumped by Louisville, that wasn't good, but Louisville's a better team. Okay, you can excuse that. Then getting just destroyed at East Carolina, which is not exactly like an AAC power. That was when it really started to okay, the writing's kind of on the wall here. But talking to people after that, they were still in Jeff's corner because, again, he's a good dude. And then just everything else that comes with being a football coach, right? So his players stayed out of trouble. I think, generally speaking, he upgraded the talent, especially through the transfer portal that at one point was the highest ranked transfer class in the country. The kind of shaking hands, kissing babies, getting attention, which is something that this program needs in this market, and then just the fundraising aspect. USF has been trying to get an indoor practice facility for a long time. They just started using it last week because of the push that Jeff made. They've been talking about an on-campus football stadium since before the school even started, and it's it's in the works still. But a lot of that is because of the push that Jeff helped make with fundraising. So he was doing everything right, except for the scoreboards and standings. And after a certain point, the Temple game, it became clear, okay, this isn't going to work out, and they had to make a change, obviously.
Can we go a little bit inside baseball for a minute? I'm just curious. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of refreshed that a lot of my listeners and subscribers actually are interested in the sports writing business and the process of various media folks. I'm curious. So a couple of years ago when Jeff got the job, Joey Knight was the guy covering the Bulls, and we had him on for a podcast. When did that? He's now covering the Bucks. When did that transition take place? And I'm curious, just as a reporter, how did you go about when you did take over South Florida? Just a little, maybe some inside, sort of insider type insight on how you go about starting a relationship with Jeff Scott and folks in the building, and how did that go? And it sounds like he was very, very approachable from a media standpoint down there when he was there.
Extremely approachable. So I guess it would have been in 2020 is when we kind of transitioned Joey more to Bucks, just some other, moving pieces in the newsroom. He ended up moving over there, and it happened during the season, if I remember right. So we kind of just hodgepodged USF. Let's just get through the season and reevaluate. And last year I was there some, but we also used, Joey would be out on occasion, the correspondent would be out on occasion, just kind of depending. Because in my role, I cover state college football as a whole for the Tampa Bay Times. Mm-hmm. Because yes, USF is in our backyard. It's 20 minutes from my house. Gainesville's 2 hours away. Tallahassee is 4. Miami's 4 and change. But this is, if I had to pick one, the Gators are the most interest to the average fan here in the Tampa Bay area. So we need to recognize that and work accordingly. But it's not like I had never been around USF. I had been around on occasion. So it was just a matter of showing up more, right? Like half of every business, it seems, just showing up and putting in the work. And by showing up and putting in the effort and asking hopefully intelligent questions, I think I got to develop a pretty good relationship with Jeff. And again, he is extremely approachable. I texted him after he got fired on, what was that, Sunday, and he responded pretty quickly. And I'm not saying that to pump my own, to my own horn about what a great relationship I have or what a great reporter I am. Believe me, it's not that. That's just him, because I've reached out to plenty of coaches. Jeff's not the first coach I've covered who's gotten fired. Odds are he won't be the last. And most of the time you just never hear anything. And that's fine. I get it. So for Jeff to respond within a couple hours and just to exchange well wishes and that sort of thing, it says a lot about who he is, because that was obviously a very tough day for him and his family, and something that I do not envy, but he was still able to try and put on a professional and a somewhat smiling face.
As a reporter who covers a number of different football programs in the state. I got to think it's a lot different with USF because they don't have that ravenous interest in what they're doing, and so I guess that might sort of translate to media access in terms of Florida, Miami, Florida State. Well, I guess it doesn't really apply to Florida State because Norvell is so wide open when it comes to access. But I guess what I'm speaking of is just the general sort of message control and, steering, trying to limit access with big time programs in general versus South Florida where they kind of need the coverage. Is that assessment pretty accurate as far as the dynamics, the differences between the South Florida and the other big time programs in the state?
Yeah, there's definitely something to that, and it's more so about. I learned it's more so about the coach than it is about the program, just because every coach is different. The one that always comes to mind is who you can talk to, right? Some coaches do not let you talk to freshmen, period. End of story. The example I always use, this was Florida in 2015. They beat Tennessee on, I think it was a 63-yard touchdown pass on 4th and 18 or whatever, from Will Greer to Antonio Callaway with minute and change left. Just a fantastic play, one of the great plays in the history of the Florida-Tennessee rivalry, which is one of the best in the Southeast. And I remember going down to post game afterwards to do interviews, and I'm thinking, okay, there's been a quarterback battle at this point, so we haven't been able to talk to a quarterback since the start of preseason camp. So I'm probably not going to be able to talk to the guy who threw the 63-yard touchdown pass. Guy who caught it is Antonio Callaway, who's a true freshman. True freshmen don't talk. So I'm probably not going to be able to talk to the guy who caught the 63-yard touchdown pass. So what am I doing here? And they did make the quarterback available afterward, but we didn't get to talk to the receiver, who again had this sensational play until the next spring or whatever it was. And I'm not belly aching because poor reporter. No, it's not that. It's unfortunate because that means fans could not hear from the guy who had this game-winning sensational play. And so I say that to say it just depends. Billy Napier at Florida was his camp was extremely open in the spring. I mean, he let us talk to just about everybody in the building because he wanted them to get some limelight, and then it gets shut down, and it just depends on this school to some degree, and also the coach and just how open they want to be. But your general point is right. USF would love the coverage, absolutely, because again, they are at best the number 2 college team in this market. And then you've got the Bucks, you got the Rays, you got the Lightning. So, at best, they're the number 5 team in the area, probably 6 or so tied with Florida State. So they're in a situation where they need the attention and want it.
On the general level of access, on one hand, I get that we're just in a different time than, say, 1985, when where now if you let a bunch of people into every one of your practices, you do stand some risk of somebody going, hey, they're running this zone read RPO to the short side of the field 80% of the time. You don't want to sabotage yourself. But on the other hand, I've yet to hear any coach after a loss say, "Yep, we let those media guys in on Monday, and for our stretches, and that's what cost us the game." I have to think that as we move pretty quickly toward in the NIL world, probably collective bargaining world, I would think sometime in the near future. It seems like that's inevitable as we move toward the super conference arrangement, where even to date the college football playoff is really open access. You get to talk to anybody you want to. Mm-hmm. And the NIL thing with the branding, you don't want to be seen as the coach who is limiting your players' opportunity to brand themselves. So maybe I'm being too optimistic, but I think the access is only going to increase as this thing goes into a world that it's really hard to predict in general with NIL, the portal, and all that.
Yeah, you definitely might be right. I have not seen that yet, and I think maybe it's just NIL is too new, relatively speaking. And then also it depends on what we mean by NIL, right? Are we talking about the situations where it's NIL, wink, wink? Or are we talking about the legitimate thing with advertisements and social media posts? And I understand how the business works. I'm not bemoaning it. I'm just saying let's have real talk here. So I think it's just going to depend on how that shakes out. But I could certainly see a situation where somebody says, look, I want to go get I want to get paid for what I do, and I need to be out there more. And some of that I can do on social media, but some of it, if I can be, on TV more, if I can be talking in press conference, that can get played on ESPN, and I can be in some of the largest news outlets in the Southeast and what have you. Yeah, that's a branding opportunity that's missed. I haven't seen a situation yet where, the quarterback Anthony Richardson at Florida, right? He just recently got a Gatorade deal. He didn't come into the press conference on whatever day that was with a thing of Gatorade and taking a sip from it and pointing at it. There hasn't been anything like that yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if that comes.
Am I off if I say that Jeff almost had an unwinnable situation because you go to a place that has had some distant success, back under in the Levitt days, but has had almost none of late. You have a place whose infrastructure, as you pointed out, was in great need of revitalizing, and now we're in this NIL world. I'm guessing that they don't have a big war chest for NIL deals, even. And maybe even I actually have heard that they were at a significant disadvantage, even compared to schools such as East Carolina and Tulane. And so I'm just curious, if Nick Saban would have gone into that situation, would he have had great struggle turning it around in terms of the results in that small amount of time?
So there's two things here, and both can be true at the same time. One is that USF has a lot of issues, and they've had a lot of issues. Look, this is still a fairly young program. I think this is their 26th year of playing college football. So for them to go from 0 to, one of the top G5 conferences, went to number 2 in the country, had a couple top 25 finishes in 26 years, that's pretty good, right? That absolutely is. And then, so the youth is one factor that nobody controls. The facilities have been lagged behind. I mean, again, they just opened the indoor practice facility. I'm not a big facilities guy. I think a lot of the buzz around them is overrated. But in Florida, I'm here to tell you, it rains every day from June-ish through September. So not having an indoor practice facility is a major, major, major disadvantage, just on a practical level. Mm-hmm. So that was something that he was battling, and that they took steps to fix. And for the success that USF has had, they've never won their conference ever. So Jeff kind of pointed this out. The coaches that were here in the past, they were pretty well regarded, and then they came here, and most of them didn't get it done. So there are some systemic issues at USF that Jeff walked into in terms of fan interest and what have you, and then the COVID year and all that stuff. I think they had injuries to 20-something guys who would have been players this year, including starting quarterback and then the backup quarterback. So they had some serious issues Jeff did not control. However, they were down, I think it was 41-0 or 41-7 to East Carolina.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the first time that they were in a major deficit like that. I mean, BYU scored a 75-yard touchdown in the first play of scrimmage. Yep. The Temple game, they fell behind. I mean, it's a situation where they were so ill prepared. They were one of the worst first half teams in the country last year, and they were just as bad, if not worse, this year, especially early on. So they fought hard, and the culture was there and all that stuff, and that's great. But at the end of the day, when you're consistently falling behind, not just by 7, but by 21 and 24 and everything, I have to think that's preparation. It's preparation. And USF was somewhere in the 60s this year in terms of talent, according to the 247 composite. And SP Plus, they were 110. So there's a huge gap between what their potential is and what they were doing. And again, some of that's systemic, some of it's injuries, some of it's bad luck, but a lot of it is coaching too. And, I hate to put it bluntly, but there were times when the staff just looked over its head. And that was something that fans had a really hard time getting past. And So I guess to button it up, yes, there are systemic issues with USF, but also the staff didn't help itself.
It sounds like it was handled in a really classy way from both sides, from Michael Kelly and Jeff. I know that Michael, when he hired Jeff, thought the world of him. And it doesn't sound like that really changed, even though the results on the field didn't produce what was desired.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Michael's was somebody at the press conference a reporter characterized Jeff's tenure as a disaster. And Michael took umbrage to that and defended it and said, look, the record speaks for itself, but this wasn't a disaster because we did X, Y, and Z. Then afterward, he was pretty adamant. Like he took offense to it, and I understand why. And it wasn't just bluster, right? I think he very much still thinks very highly of Jeff, and I think that feeling is probably mutual. Although I understand there are going to be some hard feelings there for a bit. That's completely understandable. It kind of reminds me of Will Muschamp at Florida when that didn't work out. Mm-hmm. Will Muschamp is still well liked by the people in the building in Gainesville, just as a human, just as a good dude. People really liked him, and that honestly bought him another year at Gainesville. But the results were, everybody could look at the scoreboard. Everybody could look at the standings, and it doesn't matter how great a guy you are and whether your kids go to class and all that stuff. If you keep losing it, that's the only thing that matters, and that's a situation Muschamp found himself in with the Gators in South Carolina later, and it was the same thing with Jeff Scott at USF.
You mentioned opening with BYU, and that sort of brings me to something else that has to be asked. I mean, looking at back in 20, they play Notre Dame. This is non-conference. Notre Dame. Then in 21, didn't they play Texas? They were. Let's see. They were supposed to. I'm sorry. I thought they were going to play Texas at one point.
They were going to, and I think it was in 20.
Okay, 20. That's right.
Got changed because of COVID.
Okay, all right. Then in 21, NC State, Florida, BYU. Then this year, BYU, Florida, Louisville. What in the hell are they doing with that type of schedule? I mean, that is a huge anchor for a program that's trying to pull itself off the mat.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. You have to remember when a lot of these games were scheduled too. I remember talking to Dan Mullen when Florida scheduled the series with USF. It's a 2-for-1. And at the time, Charlie Strong was there, and USF had just been pretty good, right? They had back-to-back top 25 seasons. And at that point, you're thinking, yeah, we can hang with some of these guys. Yeah. And there's a recruiting boost that comes with playing at Florida and having Florida come to town. I think they've got a series with Miami down the line, if I remember right, and that sort of thing as well. So you can understand that, and obviously there's the financial component too. Let's not poo-poo that. So I think, unfortunately, the way the schedule broke, USF, when a lot of these things were scheduled, thought they were on the way up, where it wouldn't be crazy to think they could beat an NC State or a hang with NC State. And then the bottom fell out of the program, where 5 years ago, you could think they would have hung with Louisville. And this year, the way the injuries happened and just the way the roster was and everything else, they end up losing by 38. So I don't necessarily I understand the criticism of the scheduling model. I don't think at the time it was the wrong thing. It's just that it very clearly did not work out and very clearly kept USF from being able to build at a time when they needed to build.
Yeah, and in fairness, I totally see that. And to be fair, it just has to be the scheduling thing, particularly when the scheduling routine is to do it so far years in advance. It's got to be so difficult for a program like that's back and forth. I mean, even NC State, I think their model is basically, we're going to bring in some tomato cans because we want to go to a bowl every year, and so I see what you're saying. I also see why when Jeff got there and he looked at the schedule, he's probably like, we need to try to get out of some of these games because that is just brutal for a program that's in the ditch. But
again, they weren't in the ditch, and USF should not be in the ditch, right? Like I talked about the systemic issues, and those are very real. Believe me, I see them. I talk to people. There are systemic. There are problems. But look at what USF is. They're one of the fastest growing programs or schools in the country. They've gone from nothing to a couple top 25 seasons in 26 years. They're located in one of the 4 biggest recruiting states in the country, in one of the biggest recruiting areas in the Tampa and I-4 corridor in the country. So there's no reason, and especially what the American is going to be when UCF and Houston and Cincinnati leave, there's no reason USF can't be one of the premier group of 5 mid-major programs in the country. And we've seen flashes of it in the past. So if you view yourself, this is who we should be, then there's no harm in scheduling the NC States and BYUs. You punch up and maybe you get one of them, and it's a big deal. If not, you should still be able to run through your schedule and make it to a bowl, maybe even a nice one. It's just that for a bunch of reasons, they haven't gotten to that point, or haven't been at that point here the last couple of years.
That's good perspective, because as easy as it is for somebody like me on the outside just to assume they've been in total shambles since 2007 or whenever that was. Just while you were talking, I look up the recent records, and before Jeff's arrival, it was in 2019 4-8, but in 2018 7-6, 2017 10-2, 2016 11-2. So yeah, that's a fair pushback on that notion that they were just a total wreck. Can I ask you about Miami, since the Hurricanes are coming up to Clemson this Saturday? Really interesting choice of words that we've heard from not just Cristobal in recent weeks, but also the offensive coordinator, Josh Gaddis. They are not shy about calling out their players for lack of buy-in, basically saying, I think after the Duke game, he said, if you don't want to play hard, then leave. I think either yesterday or the day before, he was asked, Cristobal was asked about players' parents popping off on social media about the assistants, and he said, well, if they don't like it, they can come pick their kids up. I'm just not used to hearing that. I guess one interpretation could be they're trying to market their program to people in the transfer portal and to recruits, because they're basically saying, yes, we are flipping our roster and we're putting a sign out saying all interested apply. Is that your view of it, or what's your interpretation of this as Cristobal tries to undertake the massive task of turning this big ship around?
I think some of it is just trying to get the culture established, because, Miami's sleeping giant's not right, but look, they've underachieved for the past 20 years, right? Yeah. There's no reason they should be as mediocre as they've been since 2001. And, they had the nice season in 2017 until they got trucked by Clemson. I think it was 38-3 in Charlotte. But they've got some serious issues where they have consistently underachieved in terms of the talent that they bring in and what the result has been on the field. And one of the easiest explanations is the guys aren't playing hard enough. And I think there's probably something to that. And with Mario and just his work ethic and the way he's built and what he knows from being an assistant at Bama under Saban to what he did at Oregon, it's kind of the blue collar thing, and we're going to work extremely hard, and that's how we're going to build it up. And when you talk to people who were around the U when they were building it up in the 80s and 90s and into to 2001, that's one thing that they talked about, that they stress a lot, is how hard they worked. So I understand trying to kind of set that expectation, and we're in charge here. This is the way it's going to be, and it needs to be different because the results aren't acceptable. And I do also think it's true that they are going to turn over that roster a lot. I think that the portal makes that easier than ever. And honestly, it's the same thing that's going to happen with Billy Napier up in Gainesville. They've already had a handful of, I think it's 7 off the top of my head, plus or minus a couple, but Florida's already had a handful of players who were either dismissed or asked to leave or had to take time off or are entering the portal or have entered the portal just really since September. And it's going to be a very busy offseason up there. And I think that's the way both those guys are trying to do it, where we inherited a situation. It was not what we wanted. So we're going to take a little bit of time and we know where the issues are, and we're going to get rid of them, and we're going to start building it up the right way.
I have been optimistic about previous Miami coaches, and they have gone on to fail, but it feels like Cristobal, the parallel that I draw is with is with Florida State under Norvell, in that there were signs early on that you could see in the body language, in sort of just the overall operation of things, where you're saying, okay, this looks different, and this looks like they're on an upward trajectory, even if the results aren't really screaming that yet. Am I off base for having the same feeling about Cristobal, even though they've been mostly a mess this season?
So I'm going to be my vantage point is colored because the only game I've seen from them in person this year, they got trucked by Florida State 45-3, and it didn't feel that close. So they've got serious issues. Yeah. Honestly, I came into this year thinking Cristobal was the guy and could do it. And it's way too early to give up on him. But I do have some questions. And the Norvell comparison is interesting, and I don't think it's wrong or unfair. Norvell had, in some ways, a better track record, though. You look at what he did at Memphis, where he took over a program that was in good shape from Justin Fuente, and then sustained it. And they were very good. They were one of the best in the group of five. And you could see that success that he had. Mario did well at Oregon, no question. But there were major questions about him as a game manager. How do we approach the red zone? What do we do on 3rd and 4? That type of stuff. When do we use our timeouts? Those things that separate the good teams from the great ones once you have the talent. And to me, those questions have only intensified this year, just the way the games have played out themselves. So, look, I thought Mario was a great hire. If I would have taken him at Florida, if I would have been the AD, he would have been my first call, just because he can do all of the program building. There's no question in my mind about that. But can he do the actual stuff on a game day that will upset a number 10, a number 9 Clemson team, or that will separate you from a North Carolina team that's really plucky, that type of stuff. And to me, those questions have only intensified this year.
What was your take on Dan Radakovich leaving Clemson for Miami at the time that it happened, and what is your sort of feeling on that right now, his leadership and what his challenge is as an AD down there?
Yeah, I thought that was a great hire from Miami, just because Dan obviously helped build Clemson into one of the 2 or 3 best programs in the country. And just all these stuff that goes into it. And he understands what it takes. And to me, my thing with coaching hires is everybody makes a bad one, right? Alabama has missed on people before. One bad coaching hire, okay, that happens. 2 in a row, too close to each other, maybe that's a little bit unlucky. But, that happens. 3 in a row, 4 in a row, 3 or 4 pretty close proximity. Maybe it's not the coach. Maybe the program is the problem. And it's hard to look at Miami post-2001 and the coaches that all failed there or had a little bit of success and then failed and not say, yeah, maybe the hires weren't great. But that many bad hires in a row or unsuccessful hires in a row, there's a program issue. And Miami, when they paid Mario $1 zillion, and when they brought in Radakovich, that to me was a sign that, okay, these guys know what the issue is. They know that a lot of the issue is not the coaches, it's Miami. And if we're going to get back to where we're supposed to be, we got to fix that. And I think Dan knows what it takes to get there. They're talking the right thing in terms of facilities, and we'll see when that shakes out and how that happens. But they're starting to do some of the behind the scenes stuff that, it's not going to show up this weekend on the scoreboard, but it might show up in a year or 2 down the line. And if Miami's going to get back to where Miami thinks they should be, and probably where they should be, those things have to be in place.
Last question, if you don't mind. Clemson won a national championship down in Tampa at Raymond James 6 years ago, won another one in 2018. They were an absolute powerhouse and right there with Alabama. Now a bit of a dip, 3 losses last year. This year, kind of not really sure what to make of them. What do you make of Clemson sort of from a distance right now?
Yeah, the national title game in Tampa is one that I will never forget. I've covered a handful of title games over the years, but doing the one 20 minutes from my house was awesome. My wife was 9 months pregnant, 8.5 months pregnant. So we had conversations about what happens if she goes into labor that day. We kind of decided if I'm at the stadium, I stay at the stadium. But if it's beforehand, then we audible. And, my kid did the right thing and stayed in for another 3 weeks. One other real quick tangent, and then I'll actually answer your question. So my wife and I decided we weren't going to tell people what we were going to name him. We knew it was going to be a boy. We had decided what we're going to name, but we were just going to keep it a secret. So when people asked during football season, what are you going to name your kid? Well, we'd say, you know what, we're going to name him after whatever coach wins the national title in Tampa. Nick and Jimbo and whatever. Well, we obviously didn't name him Dabo, but your listeners probably know Dabo's real name is William, right? Well, William is my middle name. My grandpas both have William in their name. My uncle has William in his name. William is a name that we had picked out. So
that's awesome.
And my son is William. It's not because of Dabo, but that is, it just happened to be a fantastic coincidence. So your actual question, Clemson is weird because I saw them play Florida State and I left thinking they're a pretty good team, and they absolutely are. I know the way things shook out in Florida State kind of made it interesting, but at no point really did I think FSU was going to win. And I had underrated Clemson a little bit because I think I've been judging them based on Deshaun Clemson and Trevor Lawrence Clemson, and they're not there.
Clemson fans have the same problem.
Yeah, but they're still good.
Yeah,
they're still very good.
Right.
They're absolutely a top 10 team. If they win out, they should absolutely be in the playoff, in the playoff conversation, but maybe not get in. And there's nothing wrong with being a team that's between 5 and 10 in the country. That's good for almost everybody. Unfortunately for Clemson, that's not the expectation at this point. And honestly, I think it's as simple as Clemson won with 2 transcendent quarterbacks. Deshaun is one of the best players I've ever seen with my own eyes. I didn't get to see Trevor in person, unfortunately, but so you win with 2 just transcendent quarterbacks, and then when you don't have one of those guys, you're just really good. And I'm here to tell you, that's the same way it is almost everywhere else. Georgia's not at that level right now because they got so many dudes all over the place. Alabama's not either, right? Where they've had so many dudes all over the place. But aside from those 2, that's pretty much where you are. If you got a great quarterback, you got a chance to win a national title. Otherwise, being in that 5 through 10 conversation every year, almost everybody takes that.
And it's almost, just to add to that, the stars aligned in a special way for Clemson from 15 to 20 in that it wasn't just the absolutely extraordinary occurrence of having not 1 but 2 generational quarterbacks come along, but it was also, Mike Williams, who wasn't a 5-star acquisition. Hunter Renfrow absolutely was not highly regarded. It was getting not just big-time defensive linemen, but generational defensive linemen such as Christian Wilkins and Dexter Lawrence. And so you're conditioned to that being sort of the standard, but it's really not. And I think even Alabama's going through that right now because they are not what they once were at receiver. And probably even on the defensive line and maybe in the secondary. And that's why Nick Saban has had to go into the portal the last few years, is because they've had they just haven't had, they've had the talent on paper in terms of star ratings and all that stuff, but the stars align for them in a special way too, with Devontae Smith and Jerry Jeudy and Ruggs and just that laundry list of elite receivers. So I think the Clemson and Alabama fans probably experiencing something somewhat similar right now in terms of trying to adjust their expectations to something close to reality.
I think you're right. And I'm going to start by saying something that Clemson fans won't like. Everything ends eventually, right? Every dynasty crumbles. That's what makes them dynasties. They have a rise and they fall. And again, I don't know that Clemson is done. Like, in fact, I don't think they are. I still think they're going to be really good. And I would not be surprised at all if they're in the playoff next year. I mean, who the heck knows with rosters and all that stuff. But everything ends eventually. And I'm here to tell you, I'm talking with plenty of Florida State, Miami fans over the years. Sometimes you can't predict when it happens. It just kind of does, where you miss on a quarterback or 2 in a row and you can't refill that. Or like you said with Alabama's receivers, they had You can't replicate that every year with a Jerry Jeudy and a Ruggs and Devontae Smith, who's the best receiver I've ever seen with my own eyes. Like you can't do that every year. You just can't. So eventually that's going to slip. While you have an issue here, and Bama in particular losing all the assistants right over the years, maybe you can keep restocking it, but probably not. Eventually you're going to guess wrong. I think it's that way at Clemson too, right? Where they had that staff continuity for so long, and then Venables goes and Jeff goes and Tony Elliott goes, and nobody blames them. They got a great job. Good luck. But things just change and things slip, and you can't sustain it forever. And I think that's the unfortunate reality of this. And I don't know where this all ends, but eventually it will end for Clemson, and they'll go back to the pack just like Florida State has done, just like Miami has done.
Matt Baker, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. This was an excellent conversation. Really appreciate it.
You got it. Thanks.
If you're in the Eastern Midlands and PD area and you're in any way interested in buying and selling a home, commercial property, land, need to consider reaching out to Uptown Realty. They're based out of Sumter and run by a friend of mine, Patrick Enzer, big Clemson guy, used to cover the Tigers in a newspaper capacity, longtime supporter of Tiger Illustrated, longtime listener to the Dubcast. The home buying process should be an enjoyable experience, so let Patrick and his staff do all the heavy lifting. All you got to do is pick up the phone and call 803-774-0435 or go to uptownrealtysc.com. Another loyal supporter of the Dubcast is Blackacre Law Firm in Greenville, a subsidiary of Parham Smith & Archambault. Blackacre helps South Carolina residents achieve their dreams of home ownership by providing experienced professional representation for real estate closings. Attention to detail is crucial in real estate law. Blackacre is committed to making sure nothing gets by them preparing residential or commercial closings. Blackacre also offers estate planning services for their clients in the Greenville area. Find out more about Blackacre at 864-326-3507. When you're ready for a complete renovation in your home or business, open the door to more with Harris Home and Harris Commercial. Their local experienced team will totally transform any room space, from beautiful floor coverings to construction to finished details. Harris handles every step of your renovation process, whether it's a kitchen or living room or an industrial or educational setting, like some of the positively stunning work they've done at Clemson University. Go to discoverharris.com and experience a total renovation transformation from Harris Home and Harris Commercial. Okay, joined by Eli Lederman. That's the correct pronunciation, right? Okay.
It is indeed.
Of the Tulsa Worlds, chatted with you over the summer. First of all, thank you for joining us.
Oh, I'm happy to do it. We, as you said, we chatted in the summer. I've been following you for a while, but we became acquainted while I was writing kind of a preseason profile on Brent Venables here in Norman.
Did I share with you? I can't remember. I did a podcast interview a few weeks ago with Tyler Venables. I meant to share that with you.
I don't think you did.
Wow, it was it was really profound. And I know you interviewed Tyler for that article, sort of detailing Brent's life story, and that's actually how I came up with the idea. I need to maybe try to get Tyler on a more lengthier sit down than just a press conference type thing. And he was, just to refresh your memory, if it might not need refreshing, but the thing that stuck out to me was, as he and I were talking about, hey, your sisters are going through the exact same thing that you and your brother went through when y'all left Norman, to come to Clemson, just totally out of your comfort zone, to a whole new world. I think Tyler was 10 at the time. And when the topic came up of the death of Austin Box, followed closely within 24 hours by the death of Brent's brother Kirk to alcoholism, Tyler was having trouble holding together. It was still a very deeply emotional thing for him, even though he was only 10 at the time, and even though that was 12 years ago. Or not 12 years ago, I guess 10 years ago. So anyway, that was, I'll have to share that with you, but that was...
Please do.
Yeah, I was just really sort of taken by that. I don't know what your conversations with him were like over the summer.
Well, it was funny. So, I was kind of, the story ultimately that I wrote was centered on how the 10 years at Clemson really changed Brent Venables in a lot more than just a football sense. I mean, he's come here and is absolutely pouring a lot of Dabo, I think, into this program at Oklahoma. But from a personal standpoint, a lot changed for Brent Venables at Clemson, and in a lot of ways. But talking to Tyler was really interesting because I spoke to both him and Jake Venables. And what I was told beforehand, and it certainly reflected in our chats, was that Jake Venables is the more reserved of the sons, the one who probably more reflects Brent Venables today, and that Tyler is the one who sort of has maybe a bit more of this freewheeling, just a more of a different demeanor, and apparently a demeanor that reflects more of what Brent was like as a player at Kansas State when he was in his younger days. And so it's a pretty interesting contrast, and I'd imagine that, and it was Tyler certainly who kind of had a lot more, was maybe more open about, how the family life changed in those 10 years. And so you pick a starting point, 2010, that fall was really, 2011.
Yeah.
Dates are hard at this point.
Yeah.
But that kicked off, I think, right there with those two deaths in quick succession and the family moves. And, obviously, just in any kid's life, those years, 10 to 22 or wherever he's at now, are pretty transformative anyway. But I think for the family, certainly for Brent Venables, but on the whole, that past decade was really probably, the most transformative for the family. And now here they are entering a new phase. And as you point out, for the two daughters, they're exactly where their brothers were in terms of a move at a similar age, this one back to Norman. But looking at it through that lens is pretty fascinating.
I laughed when you said freewheeling because it has literally been freewheeling with Tyler because a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, he suffered injuries in a moped accident.
We heard that from Brent.
He scarred up his face, and as I'm talking to him, he's like, "Yeah, I've learned some lessons at that. I need to, slow down. I need to pay more attention. Probably not be looking around. Probably need to look ahead of me." He lists like 4 or 5 things, and I said, "Is wearing a helmet on that list?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, maybe so." I mean, he went face first into a bumper. Pretty wild, but that guy he's played with all sorts of injuries. He's a pretty tough son of a gun. I guess we'll just stay on the theme of you sort of going to Brent's backstory over the summer. How did you get the idea, and then how did you approach it with Brent, sort of behind the scenes with, hey, I want to tell this, and what type of, how open was he with you, and sort of just in that interview process?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, Brent comes back here, and there's so many ways to attack it. In terms, you could dive into his time at OU. If you're going to write kind of that big preseason feature on the first year coach with all his history, you can dive into his decade at Oklahoma from when he showed up with Bob Stoops to when he left for Clemson, or you can look at it a few different ways. But football, for me, I'm a college football writer, and I'll say this, only fascinates me so much as people do. And getting to tell their stories. And I knew there was no way that those 10 years at Clemson hadn't changed him in some ways, again, away from football. And so that was the thread I just started pulling on. And I knew of a few of his friends from here in Norman from his time there, and just started chatting with them, got in touch with the family. And I was really prepared to write it, as you are, I think, sometimes with these stories, without Brent Venables. I wasn't counting on, getting anything other than, him at the podium. But I did. It was training camp, and I just kind of planted the seed with Mike Hauk, who kind of runs the media relations at OU. And I just said, look, if Brent, it's training camp, I know once we get going here, there's no way. But if he's got some time, I'm writing this one way or another. I'd really love to get his perspective. And it was a Saturday afternoon. I was actually sitting at the pool with some friends, and I get a call with a number that pops up with some South Carolina digits. So I raced away, got to my computer, and Brent and I talked for probably 35 minutes, which far exceeded my expectations. I think I said I just needed 10. And we just chatted. There were certain things he wasn't like super thrilled to dive into. Nothing, he was happy to talk about his past growing up. And I think, what really struck me most was how you covered this. You were the one who uncovered a lot of this when you spoke to him for your series a number of years back now. where he came to terms with his childhood. I think for a long time, to quote Brent, he was ashamed here. He felt like he had to be ashamed of his childhood. And it was in that program and with Dabo and just the sort of environment it was that he not just came to terms with it, but became comfortable speaking about it. Even Jake and Tyler kind of, heard him talk more about it than they had in their whole lives while they were at Clemson. And that was probably the most fundamental personal change, I think, for Brent Venables in his time there, which is his relationship with the past changed. And other places, I think that the program with Dabo, where the story begins, if anyone out there goes back and reads it, is these Sunday mornings with the family. Essentially, Dabo had this policy of, you don't have to be in there crunching tape Sunday morning at 6 a.m. Come in at in the afternoon, but in the morning, go to church with your family, spend time with them, all this. And Tyler, that was the memories he had would be Sunday mornings when his dad would get them all out of bed and he'd have breakfast on the table. Got the detail that Brent just loves vegan sausage. And I asked about that. And, Tyler just said they are nasty. He's like, they're these nasty brown slabs. And I was like, and he's like, but I bet you my dad has, 6 boxes of them in his freezer in Norman. So I got to ask Brent about that. And it was what I started with. And usually when you start with something from left field, I could see Brent on the other end just shaking his head. And Brent will tell you got to just put condiments all over them, but they're a good source of protein. I didn't experiment. I decided not. Thought about going to the store and finding them for myself, but I spared myself that. But yeah, it really was. That was the story I told. It wasn't about the defenses they developed at Clemson, as prolific as they were, and how much obviously that's played into where Brent is now. I mean, he's probably not in this head coaching job necessarily. Maybe he would have picked up another along the way, but without the success they had. But this was about the change Brent experienced in his decade at Clemson personally, and that was sort of the thread I pulled on.
I'm really interested to get a feel for the vibe of the fan base right now, but I guess for proper context and perspective, we have to go back to when he was hired, and on the positive side, meaning positive in his favor, it's okay. He's part of the family coming back home. He's not gonna jilt you in the middle of the night and leave to go somewhere else. He preaches defense. He preaches culture. A lot of these things that were perhaps lacking under Lincoln Riley, but the negative. I guess part of the negative is Brent didn't exactly leave under the rosiest of circumstances because he had a tough year in 2011 against some great offenses and great quarterbacks. And so you had some folks who were wanting to help him pack his bags at that time. And then the guy who he succeeded actually had some pretty good teams and has proved to be a pretty good coach at his current stop. So the line between, sort of universal support and hunky-dory vibes and holy crap, what do we get ourselves into? It's almost like the best, and this might have made the rounds, this analogy, but almost like when you're dating, a rebound a relationship after you get dumped. What is the feeling right now with them at 5-5? Because this is just not something that they're used to around there.
Yeah, that's probably the starting point. There's a few starting points, but one is that people around here just are not used to this. This is, a lot of the history this year, just different stats and stuff, goes back to the late 90s and the John Blake era. That's the last time OU lost like this. And if you look at, you take the 30,000-foot view, they don't lose like this for very often and for very long in Norman. So that's even struck me this year. Just, if you, in a lot of other college towns, 3-3 in October, it's not the end of the world, right? Even some fan bases will tell you, hey, we're halfway to a bowl game. But here that was not the case and is not the case. And so certainly this is not where a lot of people expect them to be. But going back to last December, Brent Venables comes back, and I don't know if you could have written a better, movie script of everything you laid out. I mean, this is a guy who is rooted in the last national title they won, all this Bob Stoops history, great defenses, went and did his thing at Clemson and brought a lot of promise back with him. It was a big homecoming, and that really extended all the way through training camp, because I think this last offseason is probably a lesson in all the juice you can get when you're not playing football games. I mean, all the hype was there. There was a lot of probably external reasons for wanting to push that hype too, not internally with the program, but the fan base. After Lincoln Riley left, they were looking for just anyone to get excited about, and Brent Venables was the perfect guy. But I think ultimately, and I don't know how much of this you can pin on Brent, comes down to expectations. And the fact is that, the expectations were high. They came into the year ranked in the top 10, won their first 3 games, and really put on a show at Nebraska that I think had people nationally taking some notice. But the reality probably always was that this was a team that was largely gutted in the offseason. Lincoln Riley departures, guys who transferred out. A lot of the defense went to the NFL. And so if you really, if you could have gotten that away from the hype, this was probably a bit predictable. And I don't know. One question I've got is if Brent Venables and this staff knew that in August or not. I think they'd probably tell you, if in a really honest moment, they're surprised at how hard it's been. I think Brent has been surprised at how hard it's been with this group, and that might just be that the growing pains of year one and trying to implement a system with a group that's been conditioned another way for the last 3 years. But really, between I think the personnel, maybe between just needing the time to implement things, it's been harder than Brent Venables thought. And I think a lot of people, even if you had tempered expectations, would have expected them to be in a slightly different spot this time of year late in the season.
When I watch them on defense, I mean, we're talking about a defense that has been sort of the Achilles heel for years in Norman. I guess Grinch made some progress, but like you mentioned, they lost a lot off that defense from last year. But when I watched them earlier in the year, and I have not watched them recently, but the TCU game and the Texas games, the breakdowns, at least as I saw it from the outside looking in, it's not like they're just getting blown off the ball and mashed down the field and so getting outclassed. I see a safety just running the wrong way and being a total bust on the back end, and then a defensive end or outside linebacker not properly playing the zone read. So that suggests more coaching. And so I'm just curious how you sort of evaluate it sort of in the balance between, okay, are they really that talented versus are they being coached well?
Yeah, I think that's the question. So, those the breakdowns you're talking about, TCU, Texas, the early October ones, those were glaring. That was, you look up on a play and somehow a TCU wide receiver is 20 yards beyond the secondary, and you're just wondering how that can happen. Those have dissipated a bit. I'd say that on the whole this year, in 2 games, whatever the outcomes are coming up, if you ask me the biggest Achilles heel for this defense, it's going to be the run defense.
Okay.
They haven't been able to stop anybody, and everybody's been able to run on them. I mean, they made Squirrel Williams, the running back at Baylor, who had done very little in his career before coming to Norman a few weeks ago. He looked like Adrian Peterson. It was incredible. So they've made a lot of running games, even, modest to mediocre running games, look quite good. And so that's been the big sticking point. But you're right. I mean, the breakdowns seemed very uncharacteristic, and this run defense has seemed uncharacteristic. And I think the part that would probably frustrate Brent Venables most and frustrates fans a lot is that the progress hasn't been there. I mean, they could be, if they were 5-5, but you were seeing some progress, especially on defense, because that's what Brent Venables will be judged against. I think you could stomach it more, but it's the same issues that have been haunting them since weeks 4 and 5 that are haunting them still in week 12. And that's where the questions do revolve around. Is it the coaching? Does he have to evaluate, the coordinator spot or some of those assistant positions? Or is it simply a defense that certainly has been robbed of its depth, and you can't understate just how important that is? And when you see them fading late in games, there's that might explain it for you, is that they just do not have the depth. That's a lot of what they lost, on top of just some big names on the defense. They lost depth. But something would tell me that it's probably a combination here of some of the coaching and maybe this system that, Brent Venables has dug in on. When they were struggling this year, he essentially said, I know this process. I know this system. It's been proven over 20 years. We're sticking with it, which I think is a good enough bet to make. I don't think any of us can argue against that. But there's probably some combination here of the coaching and the system, and then the personnel that's provided for a pretty un-Brent Venables-like defense in Norman this season.
It's funny how college football followers, when we're looking from the outside looking in, like casual viewers, we take little pieces of what we've seen and we judge based on that. So when I just said a minute ago, oh yeah, it seemed to me it was more players being in the wrong places and just these wide open swaths of space that TCU and Texas were running through. Well, that's just what I remembered, and I haven't even watched them recently. Then I pull up the stats after I said, oh, it's not like they're just being mashed up and down the field. I see Kansas State, 275 rushing yards, TCU, 361, Texas, 296, Baylor, 281, West Virginia, 203. So actually, it maybe kind of is like they're getting mashed and just pushed around, at least according to the rushing defense stats.
Yeah, I mean, they basically, it went from, I think, early in conference play, you were just seeing them getting exposed deep. Now it's like those, death by 1,000 cuts, or sometimes fewer, because, the run defense, whether they're getting beat, for 8 yards a carry or just giving up big busts, that's happening. And that's what I think, if we're talking about depth, what wears down a defense. It's just a team running all over you, and consistently doing it. So they've significantly struggled there. And again, you go back, is it personnel, is it coaching, is it some combination of the two? If defenders are making the same mistakes 10 games in, is that on the defenders? Is that on the coaching? I throw my hands up and say, I don't know. I'll let Brent Venables, someone like him, try to explain it to me, if he will, which, hit or miss depending on the week. But, the bottom line is this has not been, this year at least, the defense that's been that his return promised, and kind of has me, looking at some of the Clemson stats and seeing, he never had a defense, I don't think, statistically that landed here, the way the Sooners are. I mean, right now they're 76 in pass defense, 120th in run defense, and 94th in scoring defense. There was not, even in 2012, that first season, they were not there, one of his defenses.
So the fan base after Lincoln Riley leaves abruptly for Southern Cal is traumatized. I mean, is that too strong?
I don't think so. This is, if you want to go back to kind of a dating reference, this is the good-looking guy or girl who's never been broken up with.
Yep.
And it happens to them, and they're like, "What just happened to me?" That was the vibe here. That doesn't happen to Oklahoma, and hasn't. And that's part of kind of being, I think, in the class of programs they're in, however you want to define it. Top programs in the country, they don't have people walk out on them often. So that might be a good way of putting it. I don't think they're past it yet completely.
So, in light of that, you spent a whole off season with Oklahoma fans totally demonizing Lincoln, and then of course welcoming the new guy who's, as we said, within the family, and he's going to restore a lot of the things that were leaky, I guess, under Riley. Now that we're in mid-November and Southern Cal doing quite well, and Oklahoma struggling, what is the, I guess the way to phrase the question is, do you have a read on what the lunatic fringe is saying, what the more moderate fans are saying? Like, are they saying we got to cut bait on the lunatic fringe, and the moderate folks are saying, you know what, we need to give them some time to make some corrections and make some staff changes? What is the vibe, with those sort of degrees of fanaticism, if that makes sense?
I mean, you pegged it there. There's certainly, I like that phrase too, lunatic fringe. The social media, the folks in that can warp the overall view. You think everybody thinks that way because of what you see on Twitter, but there's certainly segments of the fan base that just think, he's not the guy. I think some people, and I just think this is misguided, who view him as I saw a tweet this week that I think encapsulates some of it, that they need a thinking man's head coach, not a vein popping guy. I think any characterization of Brent Venables is not a smart football mind, is an ignorant viewpoint. But there's certainly some of that. There are some people who think they've missed entirely and that it's time to cut bait, and they see that looming SEC clock coming and think, rather than waiting a few years, that time's now. I think more of the rational part of the fan base, and probably the majority of the fan base, is pretty stunned by this year, but they've got some Lincoln hate to lean on. I do think, right or wrong, or if they're maybe rationalizing, there is a segment of the fan base that looks at the fact that OU quite often in the playoffs, they'd get there and then they'd get smoked. They feel that they think Lincoln Riley was a loser because he got him there and then got smoked, typically by teams with far superior talent. And they also feel that in the last few years that the talent and the program itself had deteriorated a bit under Lincoln Riley. That might be fair. So there's a viewpoint of let's trust the process and let's let Brent Venables, who's recruited pretty well to this point, we'll see if they get that Class 2 signing day. There's a viewpoint of, trust the process, low and slow, let's get it there. I'd imagine, though, if next October we're not seeing big strides, that's when even those more rational folks will turn the heat up a little bit.
You mentioned the vein popping thing, and the fascinating thing to me, watching him this season on the sidelines, and it's something we talked about that we were both fascinated by coming into the season, was what is his demeanor going to be like? Is he really going to be able to be that detached, sort of methodical, reserved CEO type? And I've actually been impressed and maybe a little surprised at how, even keeled he has appeared. But have I been missing anything? Have there been vein popping moments at times that I haven't seen?
No, he's been good. I think in August we asked him about a get back guy. Who was he going to have? And he said, I don't think I need one. And I remember thinking there, like, you sure about it? Like, because, everyone had seen him on the sidelines. I mean, that was the thing. But he has been, I think, largely reserved. And I don't know if that's just advice he's gotten from Dabo and Bob Stoops and Bill Snyder. I mean, he certainly leaned on them for a lot of things this fall. But he has largely been more reserved, at least on the sidelines. Certainly, I mean, he'll get hyped, and you'll see him, kind of from a coaching standpoint, scolding a guy to correct a mistake. But he is not. That has not been any kind of issue. You could argue maybe they haven't played enough games that have been close enough. I mean, they've had a bunch of one-score losses, but maybe the games haven't had the stakes for him to really get to that point. But something tells me it doesn't matter if he's playing UTEP in week 2 or week 1 or playing for a title. He's pretty jacked up either way, but he's on the sidelines, at least held it reserved enough.
Yeah, I thought I read somewhere that there have been occasions where he has at least appeared to take over the defensive play calling. Have you observed that in some instances where he's been like, all right, screw this, I'm gonna start taking over some this defense during some stretches?
That's the hard one to say, because when we've talked between him and Ted Roof, you'll get some pretty mum voices on what they're doing on game day. The stated system is that, Ted Roof is calling the plays, and that there's constant communication, but you kind of wonder about that. And I mean, it's hard to know, watching from up top, how the system changes. But I do think as you look toward this off season, and if you ask the fan base, it's certainly where they think the first thing to look at is play calling, Brent Venables' role in it, and if Ted Roof is really the guy as a defensive coordinator. I don't think you could argue whether you bring Ted Roof back or not that it bears reflection, because the defense, again, has been the consistent Achilles heel of this team. And so whether you're keeping the same staff but reevaluating the communication, we've asked several times this season, have you thought about changes on that front? I mean, even moving Ted Roof down from the booth to the sideline, things like that. And they've held pretty strong and true. We'll see what they do this offseason, but I think that would be the first place you would expect them to evaluate is kind of the play calling and what they do. But I couldn't tell you, mostly because they wouldn't tell you officially if anything has changed, or even in game on the play calling front.
What does he say when you ask about possible changes to the staff in the offseason?
We haven't even gotten there yet. I'd
Okay.
imagine if it even came up, it would be shot down pretty quick. They are certainly a pretty reserved staff. Even it's a funny setup they've got. You can tell me what they do at Clemson. Maybe this reflects that, but we're getting coordinators on Monday morning, only about 48 hours after we've talked to them after the game. And then Brent goes Tuesday. So you'll get the coordinators who have a lot of things they, quote unquote, can't talk about. I'll leave it to coach. And then so it gets left to Brent. And that's an interesting media setup, I think, for a lot of us. Because the person you want kicking off the week and who can address everything is the head coach. And so that's like one interesting element. And so you'll kind of hear on something like play calling, something from Ted Roof on a Monday, and then you get to ask Brent about it the next day. And that's, where maybe you can see some of those cracks. But as far as addressing plans for the future, they've been pretty quiet about that so far.
That's exactly the format that has been at Clemson for forever, really. Mondays, coordinators, and then Tuesday, Dabo. What's the thinking behind that at Clemson? I don't know what the thinking is, other than that's the way they've always done it.
Yeah.
I think maybe, I don't know, a decade ago, maybe they did it somewhat differently, but I don't really mind it. I'm just grateful to get an opportunity to talk to the coordinators, and especially
being there.
What's that?
I'm with you there.
Yeah.
You don't get that everywhere.
And we're able to, they're very open about, if you want to pull them aside after the group to ask them a specific question, they're totally cool with that, which is very helpful. I don't know if y'all are able to do that.
They're, again, I say reserved. Between Jeff Levy and Ted Roof, you've definitely got some quieter coordinators there. I think the funny end of it will be that it'll come Tuesday and you'll want to address things from the previous game, and Brent will kind of feel like, well, let's move on, especially when they've come off those losses. And it's a little bit of a catch-22 there. You're waiting until Tuesday, and we're still trying to get to the bottom of some of these, especially on the defense, these debacles. But at that point, we're already on to a new game week. So it's been interesting. I think the biggest note, if people out there are curious about kind of the media relationship, the most fascinating part has been Brent's post games. Early I think the first game, he might have taken 90 minutes to get to the podium.
That's just like Dabo.
Man. Because I think, I don't think it's intentional. I just think coming off the field, I watched him do it after that first game. If there's a recruit, then a military member he's got to thank for his service, then some boosters, then he's got to talk to Joe Castiglione, and eventually he makes his way in. They've sort of redirected how that post game is going, and I think certainly the last home game against Baylor, he got to the podium in record time. But yes, that has been the most common theme, I think. And certainly shocked some folks in Texas, Red River, where typically the losing team goes first. And Texas got up there and they just said, well, we're not waiting. So Pete Sarkisian and them did their thing. And then we waited probably another 30, 40 minutes. And you had this whole Texas media contingent just sitting there shaking their head.
Well, here, oh, man. So they let the fans onto the field after games. And so the team hangs out on the field, doing autographs and pictures and stuff for a long time. And then they go into the locker room, and Dabo, of course, has a lot of things to say to his team after a game. And then he goes and showers and gets back in his suit that he wore to the game. And I learned years ago to use that time to my advantage. And so literally between the time that the clock hits 0 and when he stands in front of a microphone, it's easily more than an hour. And we do get players and such and assistants, but in between. But I'll sit there and spend 20 to 25 minutes. I've written my game column right after the clock strikes 0, and then quite often I've written what I've had to say for my Sunday opener that we usually write early, first thing Sunday morning. So I'm basically, by the time Dabo is at the microphone, I'm usually basically done with everything. I hate just sitting there, just doing nothing for that amount of time. So I finally wised up and decided, okay, I'm going to use this to my advantage.
Yeah, I think like many things, it's clear that's a Dabo remnant that's remaining. maybe we'll get better here at using that time.
What about him? Okay, so another element of his time here as defensive coordinator was he would not keep the same schedule on showing up when he during the time frame during the same time frame on Mondays when he would visit with us. So we would have the offensive coordinator come at 11:30 on the dot every Monday, and then most of the time we'd be waiting past 1:30 or 2 o'clock for Brent to show up. Yeah. I'm curious, have there been variances in that type of thing with him as a head coach on changing the times of press conferences and things like that?
There have nothing too crazy. I mean, his scheduled time is Tuesdays at 11:15, and I'll say earlier in the season, we probably waited a couple times till about 11:45, and from the sound of it, it's just, he's in some meeting locked in on, whatever they're talking about with his staff, and looking at, he's got film on the screen or something like that, and just pulling him away when he's locked in like that is the challenge. I can also say that he's become more prompt as the record has looked more like 5-5 than 3-0. But that is all. Everything I think you guys came to know has remained, for better and worse, about Brent Venables, and the clock. I think just wrangling him to a degree. And again, I say for better and worse. I don't think there's no malintent there. I think It can simply be when he's in a meeting, the clock disappears and he's thinking about football. I think that's probably part of what has made him so successful.
Last question. One of the fascinating things to me about fanaticism is that when things are going well, you have fans they get ticked off when you say something that might be construed as negative, or when a national media member says, yeah, I'm just not sold on this Oklahoma team / Clemson team. But boy, when things start turning sour, you're being asked, why aren't you grilling the coaches more? And why are you so positive? And have you experienced the same thing with some of the fans, some of your readers there, as things have sort of been up and down? Yeah,
certainly a bit. I think on the Ted Roof front, there's a lot of folks, who either think, why isn't Brent? Some folks want Brent up in the booth calling defense, which is funny, as you point out earlier, that they were ready to pack his bags a decade ago, some of them. But yeah, that hear plenty from the fans, and a lot of them though with, I think, justified questions, and that's where, I won't, not that they've been withholding or anything like that with the media, but when the losses are mounting and the struggles have continued and kind of look the same, I think that same message of, well, we're just returning to the drawing board, going to keep coaching these guys and keep working. I think that part has gotten a little old. I think the fan base has wanted more answers. I don't know what a coach like Brent Venables or Ted Roof or Jeff Lebby should say up there. You can't in week 6 of a college football season say, yeah, this group is hopeless. I'm not saying that's the case, but I think they've maybe at times, just been a little too, the default has been, well, we're just going to keep coaching them. It's another week, fresh week, new opportunity. I think that message with the fan base has gotten wearying at times, particularly as, it wasn't just that blip in October. They came out of the bye week, beat Iowa State, and now it's 2 straight losses in games that, again, reflected a lot of the same struggles they were facing in October. And that feeling of, well, this not, those things you keep talking about coaching up are not getting better. So what gives? I think that's the part where the impatience has shown.
Wait, there are fans who want Brent, the head coach, in the box?
Well, you talk about the lunatic fringe. I think I certainly think within there's a lot of interesting ideas for Brent to consider if you'd like to.
That is a new one. I've never heard that one, wanting the head coach to be up in the box. Eli, I know you're an extremely busy man. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. This has been great.
My pleasure.
Okay, really interesting stuff on both counts. Insights that you can only get from folks who are there with boots on the ground in both Tampa and Norman. Really appreciate both guests for joining us. Also appreciate, of course, the support of our very loyal sponsors for helping make this happen. And then finally, last but certainly not least, thanks to every one of you for hitting that play button. Really appreciate it. Cheers.